King Herod was one of the greatest historical figures of all time. This preeminent king of Judea, fueled by madness and paranoia, became one of the most successful architects of the ancient world. Nearly 2,000 years after his death, King Herod is once again on the world stage, with the unearthing of his personal tomb. From the pages of history comes a larger-than-life story, the story of King Herod the Great, whose tomb has finally been found. But why has it taken over 2,000 years? The great Jewish historian, Josephus Flavius, left us detailed accounts of Herod's funeral procession.
According to Josephus, he was put on a golden bier, like a bed, that was studded with fine jewels. And it was carried by his son, organized by his son Archelaus and his other sons around the bier, carrying him from Jericho to Jerusalem through Bethlehem to Herodion over an 8-day walk, in which finally he was placed in the tomb there. And it's there at the Herodion that there's been a search by many people to try to find this wonderful tomb.
This is where he chose to be buried. So why, with all this information, has the tomb never been found?
Josephus Flavius describes that Herod was buried at Herodium. The problem is that it is much larger than just a monument which is on the mountain itself.
Professor Ehud Netzer from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem has dedicated 35 years of his life in search of the tomb.
The best preserved part is this one, to the left, and the highest point is in between.
Ehud Netzer, he was an architect, and he was a young architect, but was very interested in ancient structures as well. And Yigael Yadin had him figure out the water systems and other aspects of architecture at Masada. And one thing that he was constantly pursuing that he could never find was this magnificent tomb of Herod the Great, which was said to have come as a beautiful tomb with gold and everything else you can imagine perhaps inside. Here you're not just looking at architecture, you're looking at tomb architecture and that of a king. And for the past many decades, it's been his quest to go and find that tomb, as well as to excavate it.
The political landscape of Israel has had a turbulent past. With disputed territory and a surrounding volatile climate, the search has been anything but easy. Yet Professor Netzer and his team were greatly rewarded for their diligence. After a lifetime of searching, on May 7, 2007, they hit the archaeological jackpot. At last, the long-lost tomb of Herod the Great was found.
A week before, we started to find the pieces of the sarcophagus, so we knew that we are very near to the monument. Once I was informed about the walls in the right place, it was clear.
Both history and the Bible have labeled him Herod the Great. But what was so great about Herod? After all, he executed several of his sons and other close relatives, not to mention his favorite of 10 wives. With the rumor circulating that the King of the Jews had been born, the book of Matthew in the New Testament tells us that Herod ordered the killing of all Jewish males under the age of 2 in the town of Bethlehem. Historians call this horrendous act the massacre of the innocents. In his final fit of madness, shortly before his death, Herod decided against 2 of his sons who were executed in 7 and 4 BCE. He had them both put to death for fear that they were plotting against him. causing the Emperor Augustus to joke that it was preferable to be Herod's pig than his son. He even had one son killed just 5 days before his own demise. Herod committed several acts of unspeakable terror and violence. This is the king history has labeled great. It wasn't his benevolence or his righteous life that earned him the title, but the great architectural legacies he left behind. Herod the Great continually defied nature to accommodate his massive and ambitious building programs. His first and most nature-defying project was the building of the port city, Caesarea. Construction of Caesarea began in 25 BCE and was completed in 13 BCE. Caesarea became the civilian and military capital of Judea and the official residence of the Roman procurators and governors of the time, including the infamous Pontius Pilate, who put Jesus of Nazareth to death. It was built in true Herodian style, complete with a theater and a hippodrome used for horse racing and Olympic Games.
King Herod started here a port unlike anything other, in a place even unsuitable for a harbor. He built a magnificent one, a large one, with moles going hundreds of meters into the sea. So large that it comprised a whole area of 2 square kilometers.
Kurt Rave is a marine archaeologist and has performed extensive research and excavations on the remains of Caesarea.
Here he had a long sandy coastline with no hard rock underneath once he left the coast. And so every structure you build on sand, so which is of course a problem. Especially here, this is sand that comes all the way from Egypt. It's like a moving sand. And this coast is also plagued by lots of storms, heavy storms in winter time. It's an open, dangerous coast. So to build a harbor like this, just on a grand scale like this, it's a major engineering feat. And this became, of course, the center of trade and administration of all this region in those days. And became also the port through which he imported all his building material, all the granite and marble pillars and stones and slabs that he created this beautiful marble, glistering marble city in the sunlight here called Caesarea. It was so magic that it took my colleague Avner Urban, the late Avner Urban, from Archaeology University, more than 25 seasons of expeditions just to figure out how they did it. I mean, if you make an underwater construction of these enormous moles underwater, already with kind of concrete that hardens underwater, from Pozzoli, from volcanic ashes from Italy, I mean, you talk about a major engineering feat, especially when it's underwater and great depth, that is even in these days not an easy thing to do.
Herod's ability to build in difficult places still amazes both archaeologists and architects today. His structures and designs are still around more than 2,000 years later, most of which were destroyed by earthquakes or wars.
We always talk about Herod the Builder, who was able to create his dreams again. Of course, it's a very complex person. He's also Herod the Murderer. But
another structure that contributed to Herod's reputed greatness is the impressive desert fortress known as Masada. Herod built this palace on top of an isolated rock plateau lying on the eastern edge of the Judean desert, overlooking the Dead Sea. According to Josephus, the 1st century historian, Herod the Great fortified Masada between 37 and 31 BCE as a refuge for himself in the event of a revolt.
No doubt that Masada, the construction of Masada, is very defensive. Imagine a mountain which from all sides has got those cliffs. It is very unusual. Usually it will be from 3 sides, 2 sides, but 4 sides is very unusual.
Masada is almost completely flat on top. However, at the northern extreme end of the fortress, Herod once again defied nature. He built his private palace into the natural formation on the side of the cliff. One could stand on top of the plateau facing north and be completely unaware of the entire palace built below. In 70 AD, at the beginning of the first Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire, a group of Jewish extremist rebels called the Sicarii took Masada from the Romans who were stationed there. In 73 AD, the zealots at Masada discovered their refuge was about to be recaptured by the Romans. Rather than accepting defeat and being taken as slaves, the members of the group killed their families and then turned their swords on themselves. They chose to die as free men. Finally, the Herodian, the place that would house Herod's tomb for all time. But why, of all his architectural triumphs, did he choose the Herodian to bear his name? And why would he choose this desert location to be his final resting place? Herod's buildings were marvels of the ancient world. Today, Israel's landscape is shaped by several of them. But one odd-shaped structure in the middle of nowhere seems to have been a special one for the king, the Herodian. Built originally as a place of refuge for Herod and his family, it would eventually become the site of his burial tomb.
He was seen as a tyrant. And so the Herodian was a place where he could quickly escape to from Jerusalem.
Located just 7 miles south of Jerusalem on the Judean desert, the Herodian stands to this day as a monument to King Herod. On the outside, it looks like a hollowed-out volcano. One can only imagine the amount of labor it took to carve out and create yet another palatial residence. Although it became the burial site for Herod, it lay abandoned for many years after his death.
Discover the past with exclusive ancient history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything from the wonders of Pompeii to the rebellion of Boudica and the mysteries of prehistoric Scotland. Immerse yourself in the captivating stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
After decades of desolation, the Herodian would find itself with new occupants, the members of the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Romans who controlled Israel were a brutal occupying force. The Jews were forbidden to carry out the practices that made them a unique people. Hadrian, the ruling emperor, attempted to root out Judaism, which he saw as the cause of continuous rebellions. He prohibited the Torah law, the Hebrew calendar, and executed Judaic scholars. In 132 AD, a revolt led by Bar Kokhba quickly spread across the country, cutting off the Roman garrison in Jerusalem. The struggle lasted for 3 years before the revolt was brutally crushed. History records that over 580,000 Jews were killed, and 50 fortified towns and 985 villages were utterly destroyed. The Herodian became a refuge for the members of the revolt. Here they carved out tunnels and secret passageways. The Unearthed team is given a rare personal tour by Professor Ehud Netzer, the archaeologist who has systematically excavated the Herodian fortress and eventually discovered the tomb of King Herod the Great. He shows us how the members of the revolt used the Herodian as a base of operations to fight against the Romans.
One of the things that intrigue me, of course, is the beauty of these tunnels.
Yes.
Now, you had mentioned they were used by the people for the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Exactly.
Were they built by him and his people, or were they already from Herod's time and then they just used them?
No. In Herod's time, there's only the cisterns.
Only the cisterns, okay.
And what is interesting, that these people who built the tunnels, they were not interested in the cisterns as cisterns, but they wanted to avoid the Romans to know that they built tunnels in the hills.
When the Bar Kokhba people sat there, they used the cisterns for all kinds of uses, not only to live in, but maybe to throw dirt into them, maybe to reuse them for any other things.
This is the biggest cistern in Herodium. It's not as big as the ones at Masada and maybe some other sites, but here it's the biggest. And we found it full with dirt, quite full. We decided to clear this one to the bottom, that at least in part of the genuine Herodian system, we see the staircase to go down. So even if there is just little water left, still you can get it. And what is very nice here is the lines of the water. You can see that water was standing here.
That's right, the different fill levels of the water.
Yes. This is a wonderful greetings from the past. You can feel the water standing.
Now we're going through this tunnel, and this is going to take us to a different area of the palace.
To the top of the palace, to the main building, on the top of the hill.
We're walking through the tunnels, but this is coming up right through the center of the Herodian, Professor?
Yes, it will bring us to the top. The idea here was to pick water from the cisterns, not going outside. So through the hill to take probably skins full of water up to the top from the cisterns.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think so.
From the brutal crushing of the revolt in the summer of 135 AD until May 7, 2007, the Herodian slipped out of the limelight and was considered another relic of Jewish history. All that changed with an amazing claim: the tomb of King Herod the Great had been found. With no inscriptions or documents found at the site, is there any clear evidence? Has the tomb of Herod the Great really been found? The Herodian is a prominent structure in the midst of mostly flat desert surroundings. Here in this desert palace, King Herod decided to be buried and remembered with an ornate tomb and mausoleum. There has been much speculation about the cause of Herod's demise.
There were a lot of enemies. He had a lot of enemies. They continued throughout his life because he kept doing things that created enemies. He killed people. He extorted people. And it's through that he's able to build these big buildings, beautiful buildings, and a beautiful tomb even at a place like the Herodian. He didn't get this just by being a good businessman.
Herod, who lived a life full of paranoia, died, it would seem, of natural causes.
He had these festering pustules on his body, and he was suffering so horribly, and the physicians didn't know what to do. He went to the hot springs at Roy with the hope that the healing mixture of salts and water and heat would be able to heal him. He wasn't healed. The word went out to all of Judea, and Judea rejoiced because they thought the word was that Herod died. When Herod heard that these people rejoiced at his death, he was irate. He was livid. And he had all the males of the aristocracy herded into the arena at Jericho. And they were locked up there. And while he was waiting for those last moments, those last days, those last hours before he would die at his winter palace in Jericho, at the moment of his death, he gave orders that all of those people in the arena would be killed at once.
He killed many to protect his own life, fearing that someone close to him would either poison or betray him. But in the end, despite all of his wealth and power, he could not protect himself from the inevitable: death. His drive to impress his superiors in Rome propelled him to achieve greatness, often at the expense of others. He may have had friends in Rome, but friends were few and far between in Judea. He was despised by many Jews, especially the Zealots. They saw his attempts to rule the sovereign Jewish nation as blasphemy and an abomination. They fought and sought to kill him while he was alive. It's no surprise that after his death, they would seek to destroy anything that was erected to honor or remember him.
Here, first of all, it's a mausoleum, which is a different way of burial, and mostly was used by rich people and by kings and so on. So the sarcophagus stood in a building that disappeared, and we have quite a good idea how it disappeared. But anyhow, we have evidence, especially by the architectural elements, which are not part of the podium, the foundation. So the tomb is gone, but the evidence is here and clear.
Somebody hated Herod so much that they wouldn't even leave one piece unbroken of his sarcophagus or of his tomb.
One of the factors that hindered the search for the tomb was the expectation of what archaeologists would find. There were visions of grandeur for sure, treasures and a beautifully decorated sarcophagus, his stone coffin. What many failed to consider was that the tomb would be vandalized and, in this case, utterly destroyed. Professor Netzer recounts the moment the tomb was found.
I was in my car, my wife was driving, and Roy, the only staff member, was at that day at the field, and suddenly I get a phone call from him telling me that we did reach the solid walls, and that was clear to him and immediately clear to myself that we really reached the monument itself. That was it. I sort of raised my hand in the car.
King Herod's deep desire was to make a difference in his world and to be remembered for all time. His barbaric acts of violence perpetuated against so many, including members of his own family, and his many spectacular architectural wonders have ensured Herod a place in the eternal spotlight. The Herodian and Herod's tomb are fascinating remnants of Jewish history that have been unearthed in Israel's ancient soil. The Sea of Galilee. 2,000 years ago, this was the home of Jesus and his disciples, fishermen that many would argue changed the world. Today, the Sea of Galilee is a major attraction for Christian pilgrims from all walks of life and every part of the world, who have come to see and experience the land of their Savior. It is also home for two brothers, Yuval and Moshe Lufin, and what some are calling the archaeological find of the century, a 2,000-year-old boat that has been nicknamed the Jesus Boat. The Sea of Galilee, Israel's largest freshwater lake, is the lowest freshwater lake in the world at 209 meters below sea level. Today, the Sea of Galilee, or as it's known by Israelis, the Lake Kinneret, is the main source of water for Israel. It is a tourist destination for locals and foreigners who have come to experience the Galilee's many historical and spiritual sites. The Sea of Galilee has a rich history from ancient times, yet is perhaps most famous because of one of its residents from 2,000 years ago. It is here that the New Testament of the Bible tells many stories of Jesus and his disciples. Yuval and Moshe, second-generation fishermen, grew up in the Galilee and spend much of their free time searching the banks of the lake.
אני בגיל מאוד צעיר הפכתי להיות ארכיאולוג חובב. הרבה יותר עניין אותי איך אנשים חיו לפני אלפי שנים, ובתוך הבקעה מצאתי המון דברים שקשורים לזה.
1986. The water level in the Sea of Galilee was unusually low. Yuval and Moshe, who claimed to be amateur archaeologists, took the opportunity to do some exploring, hoping to find something.
יום אחד שהלכנו בחוף בין מגדל לגנוסר, חוף ממש שלא היה עליו שום דבר, מוישלה מצא מטבעות עתיקות. על פני השטח מטבעות עתיקות יהודיות ורומיות, ואמרנו, אם יש פה מטבעות, אז בטח יש כאן עוד דבר. באחד הימים הלכנו ביחד ואנחנו רואים על החול, רואים מסמר. אנחנו מסתכלים טוב, זה מסמר רומי, אנחנו מכירים אחרי כמה סנטימטר אחד, עוד 20 סנטימטר עוד אחד, הבנו שאנחנו רואים משהו.
והכיוון הזה של המסמרים, שהם היו בקבוצות, בעצם גילה לנו שיש שם סירה. איך ידענו שזה משהו, לא יכולנו לדעת, אבל תיארנו לעצמנו. שיכול להיות שיש רק קרש אחד, שאין את כל הסירה, עד שלא הייתה שם חפירה, בכלל אף אחד לא תיאר לעצמו שיש סירה שלמה.
The brothers, not yet sure of what they have found, place a call to the office of marine archaeologists Kurt Rave and Shelley Waxman, who are busy themselves excavating shipwrecks off the Mediterranean coast.
We came in the office and there was this message from the guys here. We found something, please come and check it. So the next day we would come here, and already going down here from the hill, we were joking, because on the way you have this note that you go beyond sea level, okay? So we start already joking, well, if it's a shipwreck, we're going to have a funny excavation, because it's going to be the lowest shipwreck. 240 meters underwater level, Mediterranean water level, and still a dryland excavation. So it's going to be something very unusual. How unusual, we didn't know by then, but it was already, we were feeling already that something is going to happen.
Having searched the Sea of Galilee before, Kurt was skeptical the brothers had really found anything of importance.
We met those guys here and they took us to the site. Before that we had coffee and we drew exactly what we have to look for. Next time that they just don't call us just like that, you know, just check if it's really ancient. Otherwise it's a pity we come all the way from the Mediterranean. And when we came to the site, we were flabbergasted, you know. Just what we were drawing in the cafeteria was there, laying for us. And okay, that blew our minds. From that moment we knew our life will never be the same.
The brothers had discovered an ancient boat. Could these remains be from the time of Jesus? Extremely low water in the Sea of Galilee gave two brothers an opportunity to explore what is usually hidden by water and mud. Finding some pieces of wood and what appeared to be ancient nails, Yuval and Moshe called marine archaeologist Kurt Rave for help.
We met the two brothers here, like the disciples, you know, the two Jewish fishermen, the locals, and they took us to the site.
היום של הגילוי, קורט ושלי הגיעו, ובאו עם ג'יפ מלא ציוד צלילה. אמרנו להם, במה אתם הולכים לצלול? זה על האדמה, הכנרת ירדה, זה על החול. הם אמרו, בסדר, הגענו לשמה, הם אמרו, אנחנו ננקה אם נראה כל 10 סנטימטר דיבל של עץ, סימן שהיא עתיקה. ניקו את זה, והם התחילו לקפוץ. מצאתם סירה עתיקה, אתם על המפה, באותו רגע התחיל גשם שוטף, רצנו לג'יפ. לא הגענו עוד לג'יפ, הגשם הפסיק, יצא שמש ויצא קשת, שהייתה קשת כפולה, שאפשר היה לגעת בה, כל כך היא הייתה קרובה אלינו. ואז אמרנו, הסירה הזאת שייכת למישהו, אמרנו.
We suddenly got this double rainbow coming on the site, and we just blew our mind, because the rain started pouring after all those years of drought, and it was like a blessing, you know, from heaven. They said, you guys, go ahead, you got it. And from that moment became a madhouse.
Word quickly spread about this amazing find. People from all over began swarming the site. Rumors the boat was filled with gold prompted both the police and the military to guard the wreck, and camera crews from around the globe began to document every aspect of the dig.
It's certainly the only excavation that I've ever done, which was recorded by dozens of television stations all around the world. I think it's the best recorded excavation ever. We couldn't move anywhere or do anything. There were television cameras. It was a tourist site from day one. People were crowding around it. We needed police and military to keep the people away from the site. It was the only excavation with an ice cream vendor and hot dog stands and everything around it. I mean, never have seen like it. I'm 30 years in this business. I've never seen something like it.
With the entire world watching their every move, they began their dig without any preparations. People from all over began helping, doing whatever needed to be done. Realizing how fragile this boat was, they called conservationist Orna Cohen, who at first was very skeptical.
Of course, I told them no way to find a boat at the lake. It's of the Sea of Galilee because it's a freshwater lake, lot of bacterial activity. Nothing survived there more than few years. They insisted for some reason, so I came, and surprisingly, it was a boat. Once we started to excavate the boat, immediately we saw it's in a big danger. It was very warm. The wood starts to dry, and once it dried, deformed and fall to pieces. It crumbled to pieces. Of course, also the strength of the wood, it's not like fresh wood. It was like sponge. It didn't hold its own weight, so we had to put supports for the wood. So the challenge first to excavate, to clear it, to record it, and then to move it to a new place where the conservation will take place or something like that. This was an amazing challenge because all the experts for delicate shipment and stuff like that we called an engineer for delicate things all said, in the timetable you are giving us, it's impossible.
Racing against the rising waters of the lake, the team of volunteers and locals worked quickly to build dikes around the site. It wasn't long before artifacts were recovered that could possibly help identify and date the wreck.
We found a cooking pot and an oil lamp from the Roman times. We got something that exists already for many years, but finally here is the proof. Right? What I mean with exists, for thousands of years there were depictions of it on mosaics, on glass and windows, on paintings. Michelangelo, Dali, Rembrandt, everyone painted the Galilee boat already, and it's living in the subconscious of all the Christians around the world. But it's never one found. Found every lake, every sea around the world, they found shipwrecks, just not here. Okay, the holiest sea. And so here we got finally a boat from that time, exactly on that place where it all happened.
What the brothers had found in the mud of the Sea of Galilee was a fishing boat, just like the boats described in the Bible. Could Jesus have used this boat? Working around the clock in the Sea of Galilee, the team suspected the boat they were unearthing may be an ancient fishing boat. As more of the boat was uncovered and found intact, they realized it resembled an ancient mosaic that had been discovered at the ruins of the biblical town of Migdal, which was just a few kilometers away. 2,000 years ago, fishing was a thriving industry in the Galilee region. Much of what we know today of ancient fishing comes from the New Testament Gospels. During the time of Jesus, many wooden boats would have daily taken to the sea. Powered by sails and oars, these small crafts could hold 13 to 15 people. The Sea of Galilee and fishing are key elements in the accounts of the life of Jesus. Some of his disciples were fishermen, and many of his miracles were performed around the Sea of Galilee. The Unearthed team decided to go to Migdal, where this ancient mosaic was recovered, and learn more about Migdal's role in the fishing community 2,000 years ago.
Al tempo di Gesù Magdala era una delle più importanti città della costa occidentale del lago. Il nome semitico, Migdal Nunaya, registrato dalle fonti ebraiche, in particolare nella Mishnah, nel Talmud, nei vari Targum, in particolare nel Targum di Gerusalemme, rimanda ugualmente all'attività economica principale della città, che era la pesca. Migdal Nunaye infatti significa la torre dei pesci. Da Giuseppe Flavio sappiamo che la città di Magdala, che a suo dire contava 40.000 abitanti, era dotata di un porto, di un grande porto. Probabilmente questa torre dei pesci doveva essere il faro posizionato strategicamente all'ingresso del porto, al cui interno si muovevano diverse centinaia di pescherecci, barche da pesca. Perciò la pesca doveva rappresentare senz'altro l'industria principale.
As the world watched, the shape of the boat was slowly being revealed. But this excavation had started so quickly the team was unprepared and were forced to improvise in order to move the boat before the sea reclaimed it.
All we had was a jeep, a few buckets and a few shovels, and go and excavate an ancient boat, which is actually more than 99% itself waterlogged, so can hardly hold its own weight. So everything was mission impossible, and that's why we excavated many shipwrecks, even older ones, more interesting ones, but nothing was so special as this one. It was mission impossible from the first day. When we needed needles to put the number tags on it, because we were sure at one point would disintegrate and we won't know anymore what's connected with what, we put on tags, but we can't do it with, you need rust-free nails for that. So suddenly somebody got an idea to use cactus needles that were growing a few meters from us, you know, so we were just clipping all day with scissors, cactus needles, and that way we overcame that problem. To take the boat out was another problem, because the water level rose in the time, so like good Dutch, we built dikes around it, but in the end we couldn't get it ashore anymore, so we're surrounded with an island.
Preserving the wood and moving the boat appeared to be virtually impossible, until Orna Cohen came up with an ingenious plan.
For this we decided to use something very unusual. It's called polyurethane foam. You blow it to the place, it immediately got strong, stiff enough to hold and support the wood, and then you can go on excavating around it and to move. So once we came with this solution, things went very quickly.
Encasing the entire vessel with a spray-on foam polyurethane, the team was then able to protect the wood and remove the boat from its muddy grave.
At this stage, another question raised, how we are going to move it from the site to the museum. We had been offered an helicopter from the army. We thought about a truck going along the shore, things like that. But the most obvious thing was to just sail it on the lake.
The polyurethane shell not only protected the wood, it also acted as a float. And after 2,000 years at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, the boat sailed again. After successfully excavating the 2,000-year-old fishing boat from its grave, the team discovered the polyurethane shell they had encased the wreck in would allow it to float. For the first time in 2,000 years, the boat sailed again, and even carried a passenger.
Once we finished to pack the boat and when we start to sail it, to move it to the conservation area, someone had to sit on top of it to stable it, to see that all this package won't turn off. So I sat on it to stable it, and then it was moving slowly on the lake. It was very exciting, of course, thinking that I'm probably the only person who sails this boat after 2,000 years, and probably the last one too.
Today, the boat is on display in the Yigal Center on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Visitors from all over the world and from all walks of life come to visit the boat and imagine for a moment what life was like during the time of Jesus.
It was in the time of the Galilee War that we were fighting in Lebanon, also me and the brothers. Just in that period when the whole world only heard about Israel, about bad things, war and destruction and things like that, suddenly we had something positive, something good, something not connection to the Palestinian problem or army or destruction or politics or that, okay? Just something good for everyone. And either if you're a Christian or not, I mean, everybody was excited about the discovery, about the recovery, about the preservation. Everything in itself was a miracle. And so finally there was some good news out of this region, okay? I think that's one of the, if we manage to do that, it's good enough.
For the brothers Moshe and Yuval, who discovered the boat more than 20 years ago, this is the fulfillment of a dream.
כמובן, מאותו רגע שמצאנו את הסירה, ברור שזה שינה לנו את החיים, אבל ידענו את החשיבות שלה ושהיא חשובה לכל העולם. כן, ההרגשה טובה מאוד שזה קרה לאח שלי ולי.
אחרי שמצאתי אותה, הבנתי שיש דבר כזה גם עם עכשיו, הסירה הזאת היא בעצם, יש בה איזה מין רוח מסוימת שהיא משנה את כל הדברים לטובה. אנחנו, מוישה ואני, קוראים לה סירת השלום. בגלל שהתחלנו לחפור, אז המגדלאים, השכנים שלנו, אמרו שזה סירה שלהם וכמעט ירו בנו. ברגע שהתחלנו לחפור, הם הצטרפו אלינו ועזרו לנו לחפור. ואז הבנו שהסירה הזאת זה לא סירת מריבה, זה סירת אהבה, סירת לשלום.
To the brothers, it is the boat of peace, but many people around the world call it the Jesus boat. What does this boat do for Christian faith?
Well, for biblical archaeology, of course, is one of the major finds. I mean, we have a lot of archaeology here. We have very few relics that exactly can be identified from a certain time, or that time, from that place. So here, this became really a relic. It's like the Wailing Wall, where we have most of the places here, or churches that actually built much later on a site that someone decided this must be it, but no archaeological evidence. And here we get a factual fact. This is a boat from the time, from that place, from those events, and if Jesus used it or not. At that period, there were about 600 of those fishing boats around here. So we have a 1 in 600% chance, but it's not important, you know. This is how they look like. It's from the time, and this is the only one we got. So that's the closest we can get. That's enough for science. The nickname Jesus boat, we never come with, but it's from the times of Jesus.
The boat from the time of Jesus gives us a glimpse back into one of the most interesting times in history, and helps us imagine what his life was like, and reminds us of his message of peace. The discovery of this boat has forever changed this region and the lives of those who helped deliver her from her watery tomb. The Jesus boat is another fascinating remnant of Jewish history that has been unearthed in Israel's ancient soil. The Caves of Qumran were unearthed in 1947. They are located 13 miles east of Jerusalem, along the shores of the Dead Sea. Here, a discovery of biblical proportions was made. The Caves of Qumran, a modern discovery with an ancient past. In the heart of the Judean desert, only 1 hour southeast of Jerusalem, a remarkable discovery was made. A cluster of caves that are now known as the Caves of Qumran yielded some of the oldest and most ancient copies of several books of the Bible. The scrolls, which include fragments of the books of the Old Testament and commentaries on communal living and apocalyptic war, have shed important light on Judaism and the origins of Christianity. This discovery came at an interesting time. In 1947, the world was just beginning to recover from the devastating war against Hitler's Nazis. And for the first time in 2,000 years, Jews from all over the world were returning to the British-controlled land of Palestine, which 1 year later would again become the nation of Israel. It was during this time a Bedouin shepherd was tending his flocks near the Dead Sea and stumbled upon what some archaeologists are calling the most important discovery in archaeological history.
Mere chance that one shepherd went to look for his goat who disappeared, and he saw in a cave something which looks like jars. He was suspicious that those jars are ammunition or something like that, because in World War II, and remember it was only 2-3 years after World War II, the Germans sent spies who were parachuted in Jericho area, and they came with ammunition. It was the idea of the Germans was to, along with the Jerusalem Mufti, to create a revolt against the British in Palestine when the British were occupied, fighting the Germans in Europe. So he was suspicious that maybe these are arms because they are very long, narrow jars, they look like bombs. He threw stones, broke one, and he saw the inscriptions, and so actually the thing was discovered. He brought them to merchants in Bethlehem, and the rest is history.
Scrolls from this cave began to appear in the hands of Bedouin antiquities dealers, and some even appeared for sale in the Wall Street Journal.
Some were purchased immediately by Sukenik, who realized their importance, the late Professor Eliezer Lifa Sukenik. So the 7 first scrolls are now exhibited in the Israel Museum. All the other scrolls came later in all kinds of ways, and especially in 67, because they were stored in Rockefeller in 67, they came to our possession when Jerusalem was reunited.
Today, many of the Dead Sea Scrolls are on display in the Shrine of the Book, located in Jerusalem. This amazing building was designed to keep and preserve scrolls in its special climate-controlled environment. But how did these animal skin and parchment documents survive for 2,000 years in the Judean desert?
The fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the Judean desert is a very simple reason. Judean desert is very dry, which makes possible for organic materials. Because you speak about scrolls, remember, mats were discovered, all kind of basketry, all kind of organic material was discovered, like fruits and things, which shows that the climate was dry enough to save all the organic material there, including scrolls.
Today, Cave 1, where the first scrolls were found, is off limits to the public. Dr. Stephen Fawn, an archaeologist and one of the editors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, takes us as close as we can get by law.
We're at a very significant archaeological site. Tell us where we are, Dr. Fawn.
Well, we're just a little less than a kilometer to the north of the site of Qumran, and you can actually see up in the cliffs behind us that there are many caves in these cliffs. That is cave number 1, where the Bedouin shepherd first threw his rock inside the cave, and all of a sudden the biggest discovery of the century took place.
The rugged terrain of the Judean desert seems an odd place to find ancient scrolls. Who used these scrolls, and why did they leave them in caves 2,000 years ago? In 1947, mysterious scrolls were found in the Caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea. Excavations began and nearly 900 documents and thousands of fragments were discovered among 11 caves. Written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and some Greek, archaeologists were able to determine that much of the scrolls were created and used around 2,000 years ago. But by whom? Although some might say it is still open for debate, many experts believe that a thriving community of scribes known as the Essenes lived in Qumran and made these scrolls. The Essenes were a Judaic sect that existed for around 300 years, between 200 BC to 100 AD. Their emphasis of purity drove them to find a remote location away from the vile, sin-filled cities, where corruption was a distraction from following the ways of God.
This was an extremely important center of work for the Essene movement, where the priestly Essenes met with lay Essenes, and they determined the future of the group based upon the Torah and from what they thought was being passed on to them by the oracles of God and with the angels all around about them. And there they had issues of the heart, the circumcision of the heart, being pure in body, first of all, yes, but before that, entering into the community, your heart had to be circumcised and pure.
Out in the desert, they built their community Qumran and lived a very disciplined and organized way of life, following their spiritual leader known as the Teacher of Righteousness.
They studied what was right and what was wrong according to the prophets and according to the books of Moses. And there they met and they felt and believed miraculous things were happening in their midst as they were cutting new ground, preparing the way of the Lord in the wilderness.
Once again, accompanied by Dr. Stephen Fawn, we explore the ruins of an Essene complex. It is believed by some that the scrolls from the caves may actually have been written here.
What are we looking at here, Dr. Fawn?
Well, here we're standing in what was probably the most tightly secured building at the site of Qumran, because there were some very valuable things that were both happening here and were being stored here.
Okay.
Among those things, of course, you would have the scrolls themselves in the library, because this was the place where the study of the scrolls took place.
Okay.
The nightly Torah reading sessions took place here. Decisions were made here on a regular basis with the laity in the larger room on the other side, the priests sitting around this room inside, and there were layers of acceptability. The lay people could not go inside, the servants couldn't go inside, so that even the washing of the hands that had to take place in order to read from the Torah scrolls, that was done through a hole in the wall with a servant taking a jug from over here and pouring it through a hole right in through here, as servants would be standing out in this area. So Joe, you can see here even the wash basin that was used by the priests to wash their hands. This up here was from a later period, so we can take that away and remember this is all plastered up to the ceiling with the wash basin here, the priests sitting around on the benches here. There were 7 lamps found on the benches over on this side because they were reading at night. They needed lamplight to read from. But you can see here, Joe, this is where this would have been a plastered bench going across here. You got to imagine there's a bench right up about this height, and each one of these niches right here, 1, 2, 3, would have had rows and rows of scrolls on shelves facing the librarian. And when they would call for a scroll, then he would have to go through, look for a certain passage, roll it out until he could find the passage, then hand it to the reader. And so up above is where we know that there were scrolls written with plastered benches. There were at least 10 inkwells found at this site. That is 10 times the amount found in the entire Judean wilderness. You struggle to find even one fragment of an inkwell someplace else from this period in the Judean wilderness.
The Essenes' belief in purity and righteousness was very similar to the message preached by John the Baptist. Was John the Baptist really an Essene? One of the debates being waged amongst scholars is whether John the Baptist was an Essene or not. We know that the Essenes lived a very strict sectarian lifestyle. Their message heavily emphasized personal purity, which could be achieved by full water immersion, a type of baptism. We know that John the Baptist came from the wilderness preaching a message of purity and repentance through water baptism. Is this enough evidence? What do the experts have to say?
I don't think John the Baptist was an Essene for a number of different reasons.
Dr. Shimon Gibson is a highly respected archaeologist in Israel. He is of the mindset that John was not an Essene.
First of all, there's no evidence at all that, based on Luke chapter 1, verse 80, that he grew up in desert places. I mean, the Greek actually indicates that it's a place which is far away from human beings, but that can be also in the Judean hills, not the desert. The most important thing for me is that John the Baptist is a very inclusive person. When he's down at the Jordan River and he's saying, all of the children of Israel come and be baptized, he's saying everyone. Whereas the Essenes were very exclusive. They were very choosy about who might or might not join their group.
John the Baptist lived in the sphere of the people of the Dead Sea. He was close there, the place of baptism. All that is, he knew them, very close to them. Many ideas are very similar. I'll give you but just one example why they are different. Just small, which is very trivial, but still it can show. One of the important things about both of them was purity. Baptism, the idea of baptism is purity. But whereas the Dead Sea Scroll people used to go with white robes, which are clean, which can be easily washed, when you describe John the Baptist, what did he wear? A woolen fairy or whatever it was. That's how he's described. You can see it also in all the depictions of Christianity in art, if it is Byzantine art, if it is Renaissance or Baroque, whatever, you can see them all. So you see, even such an external thing shows that they were different. He did not belong there.
Not all archaeologists dismiss the similarities between John the Baptist and the Essenes. In fact, Dr. Stephen Fawn is convinced that he most certainly did belong to the desert group.
And John the Baptist was a person who was preparing the way of the Lord. In cave number 1 was found the community rule, which says that their reason for being out here in the wilderness was to prepare the way of the Lord. And many of the teachings of John the Baptist actually are very close to those of the Essenes.
To find out more about John the Baptist, we visited Dr. Gibson at what some believe to be the cave used by him for his baptism rituals just outside of Jerusalem.
There's a flight of steps leading down.
This fascinating cave has many engravings which appear to be linked to John the Baptist and early Christianity.
Great. Be very careful of your heads as you come in. Oh, wow. It's amazing, isn't it? Wow. So this is the Cave of John the Baptist, as we call it. To be frank, one should call it the Tsuba Cave and allow the discoveries then to speak out. Now, the earliest remains that we have date from the time of John the Baptist, and they post-date the original use of the cave, as I mentioned before, from the Iron Age. But this Iron Age water system had been abandoned and had been like that for about 600 years or so. And then this group of Jews come and they use the cave for the purposes of baptism. People were coming, they weren't living in a cave, they were coming to be baptized. The rituals themselves are divided into two. You have people who are conducting rituals in the front of the cave, and only when that had been completed are they descending into the back of the cave to be cleansed, the flesh to be cleansed in the water. Now, this is remarkably similar to what we know about the baptism process of Jesus in the Jordan River. John the Baptist receives Jesus as well as others. There are all sorts of rituals which are performed on the banks of the Jordan River with the remission of sins. And this explains perhaps these remains that we have here in front of us.
The Essenes and their community at Qumran existed during the time of John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth. Yet of the nearly 900 scrolls found, there is not one mention of either New Testament figure. What does this mean for Christianity? The Caves of Qumran yielded one of the most important finds in archaeological history. Nearly 900 scrolls and thousands of scroll fragments were discovered accidentally by a shepherd while he tended his flocks near the Dead Sea. 60 years later, these Dead Sea Scrolls are still catching the world's attention with every new discovery and every new translation. But how close are the Dead Sea Scrolls to today's modern Bible?
We must remember that the Bible which we have today is considerably late. There are changes, very few, but still there are different versions in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember another thing, till then, we have got, till the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest text of the Bible we had was the Greek translation of the Septuagint, which is from the 3rd century BC. And there are differences, which means the translators into Greek in the Septuagint has got a different version. On the other hand, many years ago, about, in the late 70s, early 80s, was discovered the blessing of the priests in Jerusalem. This is identical to our Bible, which means there must have been few versions of the Bible. Dead Sea Scroll can be one, ours we've got two, and already the scholars for years know already that there are some different versions here and there.
One of the things that the Dead Sea Scrolls does for us, of course, it confirms the existence of the biblical text, and with a consistency that is really hard to believe. The biblical scholars, to see that the biblical text that they found in this cave and other caves around about, they in many ways did not really expect the scrolls to be so close to the text that we're presently using today in the synagogues and in the churches. And also it shows that there was a serious type of spiritual encounter that they believed that they had with God, similar to what the priests would have had in the temple, but this among both priests and laity, taken seriously the idea that the person's heart had to be circumcised, that it opened them up to the mysteries of God that could only happen in community with God Himself. Some of the same types of things we find in the communities of the New Testament and other communities that we speak of and know of in early Judaism.
Yet in spite of the discovery of thousands of scrolls and fragments, there are still many mysteries surrounding these infamous scrolls and Caves of Qumran.
What hasn't been found is quite important, and I think one should say that. No, not one fragment of the Gospels has been found hitherto amongst the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls sect, and also no writings which could be perhaps associated with John the Baptist. That's quite important. What isn't there, I think.
With thousands of caves in the Qumran region and around the Dead Sea, scholars are hopeful that more scrolls will be found, and that they will reveal greater insight into an important time in history.
I still think that there's a potential of discovering scrolls in that region. Personally, I would like to see a thorough scientific investigation made of the caves and the vicinity in order to look at all the different sort of possibilities. Of course, one hears from time to time rumors of a scroll that has surfaced somewhere in Bethlehem. But you know, it's very difficult to know what's behind these rumors. I've heard these rumors from a number of different sources now. So there's a possibility that one day some amazing scroll will surface, and I'd like to be the person at the spot when it surfaces, but you know, we'll have to see.
The Caves of Qumran have given us some amazing secrets from the past. Yet while answering many questions, these fascinating writings still hold many mysteries. Today, the scrolls and other articles from the Qumran caves can be seen at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem in the Shrine of the Book. visitors can see for themselves a piece of biblical history and experience for a moment the wonder and the awe that has for the most part been reserved for archaeologists, scholars, and shepherds who have stumbled into mysterious caves looking for their sheep. Who knows what secrets may yet be revealed? The Qumran caves and the Dead Sea Scrolls are fascinating remnants of Jewish history that have been unearthed in Israel's ancient soil.